Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Ray Nagin has been living the last few years in Texas. He may be coming home to Louisiana soon, though not where he would like to be. We'll be looking tonight at the former mayor's downfall and at public corruption. We'll also examine the concept of legacy lawsuits and who is taking advantage of them, as well as the fallout from the Bourbon Street shooting and a possible compromise of Common Core. And we will discuss an upcoming public television film about a New Orleans City Council member. On the set for us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Gordon Russell, managing editor for Investigations, the New Orleans Advocate, Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4, and Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. And first on over to Gordon. And our former mayor, Ray Nagin, learned his fate, where he's going to be perhaps for the next 10 years. Yeah,
he doesn't know for sure where he'll be, but the Judge Ginger Berrigan has recommended that he be sentenced to 10 years. That part we know, and that she's recommended that he go to the federal prison in Oakdale, Louisiana, which is a camp, which is a good thing. It's a minimum security prison. You're only eligible for that level of security if you're serving 10 years or less. So that was, he caught a big break in terms of course, 10 years is a very long time, but he caught a big break in that he was looking at 15 to 20 years under the sentencing guidelines. And Judge Berrigan gave a number of reasons why she decided to go below that.
And why?
Well, she gave a number of reasons. She mentioned his age. He's 58 years old, which is, you know, he'll get out when he's maybe 66. You have to serve 85% of your time in federal prison. She mentioned that she doesn't think he's going to ever be in a position of public trust again. And one of the points of a long sentence is to prevent you from reoffending. And she said that there's no way this guy's ever going to be in a position like he was in before. Actually, there's a chance that this sentence will be appealed by the feds because, number one, they don't necessarily like the precedent of such a large downward departure. I don't think they necessarily care that he serves more than 10 years. And on the one hand, they probably don't want to seem overly bloodthirsty. But on the other hand, I spoke to some experts about this who said they may not like leaving those factors out there as possible precedents for reduced sentences for other people. One lawyer I talked to said, you know, 58 really isn't that old, and older defendants routinely get sentenced to longer sentences. Edwin Edwards got the same amount of time, but he was much older. And also this notion that he should get a break for being the fact that he won't be able to do this again. Well, you could say that about almost anybody who's convicted of public corruption, Edwin Edwards being a possible exception in that he's running again. But so.
Well, this appeal decision, where would that be made?
It's up to the Solicitor General, who is a high-level Department of Justice appointee. The way it works is the local office will make a recommendation. They'll send it up to the Solicitor General, who will give the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and then it will be up to this local office to file the appeal if they choose to do it.
Gordon, he still maintains that he did nothing wrong. He still, in his response to Channel 6, he alluded to a conspiracy. First of all, of the 20 charges in which there was a guilty verdict, what do you think was the strongest case against him? And is there a conspiracy?
Well, let me start with the strongest part. I think that the case, there was a number of schemes in which businessmen were accused of bribing him and that he was found guilty of. The strongest, I think, was the one involving Rodney Williams, who had an engineering firm. And it was the strongest mainly because Rodney Williams didn't have any other criminal exposure. The only thing he's accused of and the only thing he pleaded guilty to was paying bribes to Ray Nagin, which made him a really compelling witness at the trial, whereas the other witnesses were somewhat compelling, but they were all people who were looking to save their own skin in some ways. You had Greg Meffert and Frank Fradella and a guy named Mike McGrath who testified wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, and they were obviously giving some self-serving testimony, although it rang true in some cases.
You were there for that day in court when he learned his sentence. What was the reaction, not just from Nagin, but also the prosecutors, because the time was less than they had recommended?
I mean, they seemed okay with it. I think they were probably a little bit disappointed, but I mean, I think, you know, they had offered him less time than this before trial, and I don't know that anybody feels like this isn't going to send a message or that this is, you know, this is a slap on the wrist. I think, you know, at this level of the thing, when they've invested all this time into it, they kind of want to see him punished more than that, probably. But I mean, I don't think they're that disappointed. I think Ray, Mr. Nagin, was fairly serene. You know, he didn't seem exultant, but he didn't seem. Mike, you were there, and was that?
There might have been just a slight bit of relief that it was over with, that it was not the worst case scenario. And remember, the sentencing guidelines called for 15 to 20, roughly. And the departure was significant to go all the way down to 10 years. So considering what he was bracing for, I think there was a bit of relief. He walked out of there, you know, his head held high, as he has throughout the proceedings for the most part. It is striking that he never did accept responsibility. He's going down fighting. He will file an appeal. He'll probably ask for an appeal bond to delay his reporting to prison so that, you know, he can be free while the appeal goes on.
Which
I think
is now scheduled for what? He's supposed to report?
September 8th, and I think the judge is unlikely to
That's
grant that.
unusual.
I don't think there's a lot of, most people don't seem to think there's a lot of great appealable issues in this case. And it seems like, to the extent there's going to be an appeal, it's going to rest on this notion of prosecutorial misconduct in the commenting scandal.
And also, Gordon, you did a piece about how Nagin is not the only one to be caught in this kind of situation, a public official since Katrina.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the list, it's really amazing. I hadn't realized till I counted them up, but we've had 17 local elected officials since Katrina be sentenced for public corruption or related crimes, in some cases tax crimes, but all related to their public service, which is, when you think about it, a pretty remarkably long list. And if you look at the years pre-Katrina, you didn't see that kind of volume at all.
And so why are we seeing this volume?
I mean, that's a tough question. I mean, I sort of posed the question in my story, was it related somehow to the, and it's hard to say for sure, but there may have been citizens were much more engaged, arguably, after Katrina, and possibly public officials were more greedy, but both of those things combined, you had a lot of people giving tips to the newspapers, to bloggers, to the feds, and I think a lot of these cases arose directly out of newspaper and television articles.
And Bill Jefferson was a mini empire in himself, and his case was in process before Katrina.
Right, they had raided his house just a couple of weeks before the storm.
But there were other people who related to Bill Jefferson.
His sister,
and so just
all
like
his siblings, pretty much all of his siblings.
But it seems to me
And-
what you're saying is an engaged citizenry is
I
really...
think that was a big factor, yeah. And those other cases did come out of newspaper articles, or that's what opened the door into the...
And is it fair to say Jim Letton?
Yeah, I think that's a huge factor. I mean, I think Jim Letton, like him or not, he made public corruption his, you know, that was his North Star, and he had press conferences, too many perhaps, but he constantly pounded home this theme that we won't stand for this stuff. Right. And I think people knew that if they brought things to the feds, they were going to get looked at.
And remember the shift in attitude after Katrina. The public was not going to take the same old, same old.
Right.
They were calling in tips left and right, both to the media, we got them, as well as to the authorities.
And it has made a big difference, obviously, and a big impact. Okay, we've got to move on now to the next segment. And Errol, I know you want to talk about a film that's going to be shown on PBS and here at WYES this coming Monday night.
Yeah, 3 documentary filmmakers who spent a lot of time in New Orleans in their early days, did things about New Orleans dialect. They've been fascinated by the city. They're out of New York now. And they did a film, they wanted to do a film about politics in New Orleans in the days after Katrina. And they became sort of like taken by the whole emergence of Stacey Head. So they did this documentary called Back to Abnormal. And we're going to show a clip. Now this is after Head is elected, during the Nagin administration. You can see the hostility on the council. I think we both agree things are better now, but you can see an interaction with Cynthia Willer-Lewis, and then the famous interaction with Veronica White, who was head of the sanitation department at the time.
Back to abnormal.
We're paying too much for a solid waste collection system to the detriment of the citizens of New Orleans.
Now, what is this?
It's just a prop to show the ludicrousy of our system.
Why don't you sit down, Miss Head?
No.
Why don't you sit down, Miss Head? Miss Head, you're out of order. Sit down with your prop. You've been very rude in holding this placard up for whatever purpose. I'm not sure, but it's not accomplishing.
I wish I could bite my tongue more. I do. And I work on that. I struggle with that because one of my negatives is that because I'm so direct, some people don't hear what I need them to hear and what they need to hear. I need to work on that style. I consciously work on it every day. I'm getting slightly better every day, but I backslide. But the typical politician talk drives me batty. So the council meetings sometimes, I want to put a pin to my jugular.
We get reports every single month. It is with the invoice. It is in the contract, and we receive them. I can give you every last one of them on the disc because we receive them on the disc.
I have asked you for this no less than 5 times verbally.
You've never asked me for this.
Ms. White, this is grounds for discharge. I cannot
Do what
believe-
you have to do.
I cannot. Well, I am not going to approve your budget, not dime number one, and I will stand before the citizens of New Orleans saying you're not going to get sanitation service collection because I am not going to be bullied by Ms. White, and you are not telling the truth, Ms. White, and I find that incredibly offensive.
The problem is with you have selective understanding, and your motive is to paint a picture as if everybody in this department is thieves and crooks when you're the one.
You have paid.
I'm not holding my
100
tongue anymore.
Well, that was quite an exchange. You saw the film, Stephanie, and
I
actually
did.
you have a column coming out this Sunday about
I
it.
do, and I should say I'm very briefly in it, so don't blink. So,
So what do you think? Give us your review.
well, I really enjoyed it, I will say, and I think, you know, for one thing, it's funny, but it's very nuanced. It's interesting. I spoke to one of the filmmakers, Louis Alvarez, before, and he said clearly it was designed not for us. It was not for people who know Stacey Head and know her backstory. It's for a national audience. So he said they included things like that at the beginning because they wanted people to kind of wonder what was up with her and not really be sure what to make of her and say, you know, is she a racist? There's a lot of race in the film, obviously. She's running, it focuses on the 2010 election. She's running against Corey Watson, who's an African-American pastor. And, we're still in that post-Katrina era, and she is representing a black district, a majority black district. So there's, race is very present as it was in that clip. One of the really interesting things I thought is, watching it now, because that's really not Stacey Head anymore. It's not really it's not really her politics anymore. She's, the confessional scenes are really good because you kind of see her really struggling with these issues that she, to a large extent, really has gotten control over. And it's
I don't think we've seen a scene like that for many years.
And I think it might help sometimes that her foil is maybe more Mitch Landry than Ray Nagin. I mean, the Cynthias aren't there anymore.
Does the film take us there, that we haven't seen those kind of those scenes recently? Does it take us to that point? To later, to where we are now? How far does it progress us?
Well, it does. The film is about the 2010 election, but at the very end, there's the thing you often see in documentaries, where are they now? Some of the people who are her harshest critics in the film, you find out, became her supporters, and I think that really is to her credit. She angers people, she gets in people's faces, but she's a good watchdog, and I think people really have figured that out. And if you look at the election this past year, she won across the city. It was not a racially divisive election at all.
I watched that clip several times this week, and then I think when people first saw it, they saw it in terms of race. But I realized, especially in the context of the other news, that this was really about the failure of the Nagin administration, too. Because department heads answer to the chief administrative officer. The Nagin administration, from the very beginning, their CAO's office was a fiasco. Remember from Kimberly Williams Butler, and then they had kind of like a patchwork of CEOs. I couldn't imagine a good CAO allowing something like that to happen, having that kind of confrontation, where you'd have that kind of issues that would be resolved differently. And so, to me, it kind of underscores that more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, this late second term, I think, was just kind of turned into a circus a little bit.
It did. Now, what's interesting, I spoke to her. She has a number of regrets. One of the other clips featured in the film is when she was blowing kisses at the audience in the public housing debate. She says she was aiming at one person who was on her porch the night before. She was tired. She absolutely regrets it. She doesn't regret that confrontation with Veronica White, though.
Okay, we have to move on. And of course, once again, the film is going to be on this Monday night on WYES, and you can go to WYES.org, check our schedule, because I'm not exactly sure of the time.
I think it's the program called POV.
Yeah, it's POV. It's POV. So just check our schedule at WYES.org. Okay, moving on now to a really very very, very sad and tragic incident that happened last week, and we weren't on the air last week, so we weren't able to cover it, but the Bourbon Street shooting, Mike, you covered that.
Yeah, another horrific shooting in New Orleans. This one a little higher profile because it unfolded on Bourbon Street. 10 people were hit. Tragically, one woman died. Brittany Thomas of Hammond, 21-year-old, just there to to have fun and celebrate, caught in the crossfire. To the police department's credit, they scrambled to develop suspects. As we know, anytime anything happens in the French Quarter, and especially on Bourbon Street, there's going to be surveillance, video, cameras, and not to mention just people on the street, using cell phones and capturing video. As soon as that went out, they developed a person of interest, a person named Justin Odom, who lives on the West Bank. They interviewed him, and the links kind of came from that point. A suspect has now been arrested. He's in Mississippi, where he's fighting extradition, a gentleman by the name of Trung Lee, age 20, who actually is an associate of Justin Odom. The police are looking for a second gunman, still unnamed, and they're poring over more video footage, surveillance footage, to try to get a clear picture. This is one of those cases in which the public has been a tremendous help. Trung Lee was developed because of all of the images that were shown. Crime Stoppers offered a reward. Somebody apparently is going to cash in on that because it looks like the tip came from the public that developed the name Trung Lee and then his arrest in Mississippi.
So the second suspect, I mean, you say there's no one named, but are they at all, do they have an idea of what this person might look like from the video that's there? Or?
The police have not put out any description as yet. They usually have more information and they spring it at an appropriate time. What we do have is that the Crime Stoppers has increased the reward to $5,000. That makes it appear that they don't have a real clear idea of this second gunman, and that they really are right now looking over hours and hours of surveillance footage from a variety of cameras. And if they do come up with a clearer image, it's very likely that's going to be put out to the public to try to generate some tips. Trung Lee's not talking. Justin Odom was interviewed with an attorney. He was an associate of Trung Lee, so it all makes it kind of intriguing. One of the victims, one of the 10 who was injured, was another associate of both of those gentlemen. So we don't have motive yet, but it looks like they're starting to connect the dots.
And just real quickly, as a result, now we see more state police.
Well, right. That really highlighted what has been an issue for well more than a year, that the NOPD is badly undermanned. The state police are going to contribute 50 troopers. Mitch Landrieu went out very publicly, for the first time really admitted, you're right, we don't have enough police. He asked for 100, he's getting 50, which is quite a contribution from the state police.
All right, Mike, thanks a lot. Moving over to Stephanie now, and something that has been out there for a lot of discussion and confusion is Common Core, and there was a compromise offered by Bessie, but...
Don't expect the confusion to end. That's the bottom line here. There was a compromise offered by 3 members of Bessie, including Chaz Romer, who's the head of Bessie, former Jindal ally. Basically, what had happened previously was that Bobby Jindal wanted to pull Louisiana out of Common Core. The legislature and Bessie and Superintendent John White didn't agree. So he took unilateral action to basically cut the contract that was being used to purchase the test developed by a multi-state consortium for Common Core, being used to compare results for students in Louisiana to other states. And the compromise, so this caused really some chaos. I mean, school starts soon. You can't really teach the test if you don't know what test you're using. And there's a lot of confusion, and there's a theory that it might end up in court. It probably will at this point. What Bessie did, what several Bessie members did, was basically say, okay, for next year, what if we don't use this national test? We'll use the LEAP test, but we'll include some of the national questions so we can still compare. It'll be a Louisiana test, but we can still compare to other states. And the contracting issue's off the table because they'll give us these questions for free. That was their offer. Bobby Jindal said no. He said that doesn't solve the issues. It doesn't deal with the contracting irregularities that they have subtly discovered in all of this, allegedly. This is really all leading up to a meeting that Jindal and Superintendent John White have scheduled for late next week to try to sort something out and really figure out what what's going to happen in schools this year.
And Jindal is still supportive of White, isn't he?
Sort of.
He says, other than this, everything's great, but they might go to, they're really at loggerheads over this, and this is kind of the issue right now.
And last week he cut his ability to award contracts from what was it, 20,000 to 2,000, which seemed like more of a shot across the bow than anything else.
And John White, everybody's looking at audiences outside Louisiana. Jindal's looking at the presidential audience. I think John White, he certainly wants a future in education reform, so he realizes that maybe attaching his star, following Bobby Jindal is not the way to go, if that's where you want to be.
So the bottom line right now, as far as the testing is concerned, is we still don't know. It's still really up in the air.
We still don't know. It's up in the air.
All right, Stephanie.
And with each passing week without knowing, that hurts students.
It does.
It hurts teachers, it hurts students
And the
severely.
school systems, I know, it's adding a lot of confusion for them all.
A lot of stress.
Teachers, students,
A lot of
parents.
anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the next topic now. And Mike, you've done you and your colleague David have been working on legacy lawsuits. So first off, let's talk about what does that mean? What is a legacy lawsuit and what's happening with them?
Yes, that lawsuit gets its name from this legacy of oil companies drilling in Louisiana, on land and in marsh, and leaving behind unlined pits filled with pollution. And this goes back some 60 years. And just in the last 10 years, we've seen landowners filing lawsuits, multi-million-dollar lawsuits, claiming contamination, both surface contamination and groundwater. And one of the very first of these cases to go to trial by plaintiffs named Corbello out in Calcasieu Parish, the oil companies did not agree to a cleanup. They said, go ahead and take it to court, and a jury trial ended with a $80 million verdict.
Substantial verdict there.
Substantial.
For land that was valued at what?
About $110,000.
Substantial verdict, yeah.
So what became very clear to the oil companies is that Louisiana juries are not necessarily going to be on our side, and that the way the Louisiana law works, you can get damages far beyond the value of your land. So that has now sprung this almost cottage industry of these lawsuits, about 360 filed to date by a whole variety of landowners. And it's become an amazing battle between, obviously, big oil as the defendant in a lot of these suits, but the landowners, as we exposed in the second of our two stories so far, is that some of the landowners are wealthy and powerful people, such as former Governor Mike Foster, the former Democratic Party chief Buddy Leach, and others with a lot of money, a lot of power. And then these plaintiffs' attorneys, a couple firms have represented the vast majority, one firm in particular out of Baton Rouge, Talbot Carmouche, representing about 75% of these plaintiffs, have gotten fabulously wealthy filing these lawsuits. And the impact has been great, both in the courts as well as the legislature, where the oil companies, realizing they're on the losing end in courts, they've now gone to the legislature several times and gotten bills passed to rein in the lawsuits, cap damages, maybe put cleanup in the hands of state regulators rather than duking it out in court where juries are not in the favor of the oil companies.
According to your story, even some people who've gotten money from the oil companies aren't necessarily using the money for cleanup.
Well, yeah, that was something that really was kind of eye-opening to the oil companies. That first of all, a settlement or a judgment by a jury, that's millions in the pocket of the plaintiff, the landowner. But there's no requirement that the landowner actually could then clean up the property. Damages are damages. They could, choose to have contaminated property or go clean it up. And that's one of the things that's, at least the oil company in lobbying for this last bill, trying to force the money to be used for cleanup. Because the real loser in all of this is, of course, the environment and the people of Louisiana. Turning this over to future generations, the contamination is tremendous. And one thing looking forward is that this lawsuit is almost a mirror image of sort of the next wave of lawsuits, which is the coastal erosion, the levee board lawsuit versus 97 different oil companies, almost on the same grounds.
And
it's
you
a
have same lawyers in some cases.
same
right?
lawyers, and it's a
Gladstone's
legacy
yeah.
of, decades of damage.
So even though there's no requirement that some of this land be remediated, has any work been done for cleanup at all?
There has been, and certainly with some public attention and with the battles being waged, in the legislature, the plaintiffs, realize that just leaving the pollution is not a very good PR move.
Yeah.
And but they claim that, look, the cleanup plans that the oil companies come up with is not sufficient. It's just sort of tossing dirt on a pit rather than digging down. And so there's been legal battles over the cleanup plans. So one of the ideas is taking it out of courts and putting it in the hands of regulators, environmentalists, and
Okay. And you have more of segments of this
We do,
series
several
coming?
more,
We'll be
yes.
looking for it, Mike. Thanks a lot. Right now, it's time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, one of the famous unsolved murders in New Orleans history was the murder of Dr. Mary Sherman. And July 21st will be the 50th anniversary of that. Her charred body was found in an uptown apartment. It's touched off all kinds of conspiracies, including a book called Dr. Mary's Monkey. People link it to the Kennedy assassination, to the AIDS virus, to the CIA, and goes on and on. There are some people who say it's bad science, others who swear by it. But the one kind of nice thing is that morning at 10 o'clock outside her apartment at 3101, there's going to be like a little jazz funeral eulogy just to honor her memory.
Okay, quickly down.
Well, real quickly, Walter Reed, the embattled district attorney in St. Tammany Parish, I think we should expect a decision sometime soon, maybe in the next month, about whether he's going to run for re-election. Qualifying's in August, and the election is in November.
All right, thanks a lot. Mike.
Well, looking ahead to our Tainted Legacy series, next week we look at even ill-gotten land has been the subject of these legacy claims, and we reveal some of those next week.
Okay, we've been looking for that, Mike. Stephanie.
Okay, out in Jefferson Parish, remember when 3 different big hospital companies wanted to run the hospitals? Right. HCA walked away, Ochsner walked away, now Children's is threatening to walk away. Everyone frustrated with the politics and the divisiveness on the council.
Yet another bit of confusion.
Yes.
All right, and also the POV comes on at 9 o'clock Monday here on WYES, so be sure to watch. Thank you all for being here. Thank you guys for being with us, and we hope to see you again next week. For Informed Sources, have a good evening.